So we're going to continue on. This is kind of our last week of sequencing, lecturing, right? And so I'm going to go through and we're going to talk about a few things that we haven't really talked about too much yet. And the first one, and the first section is going to be basically, it's going to be basically the ruler bar, right? With our sequencing, we were using the count off, which is up here. And you can turn the count off on and off just by clicking on this green button. So the first thing I want to show you is creating something called leader bars. And the reason we're going to do this is because the way we're recording right now, whenever we start recording, we're starting at beat 1, measure 1. And because of that, if you start a little bit early with your playing, something's going to get clipped off, right? So we're going to make these leader bars, which is just basically time up front before your song starts. So before we do that, I thought I would give just a little bit of a history lesson here and talk about where leader comes from. So once again, it comes from the analog tape days, and there's several types of leader. One type of leader was a piece of colored plastic tape, either plastic or paper, and we would put this plastic tape at the beginning of reels of tape, of analog tape, and at the end of reels of analog tape. And we could also put it in between songs. And so if you looked at this reel of analog tape, you could see that there was 3 songs because you would see 3 pieces of leader in between, right? And so when I first started getting into audio, it was kind of by accident. I was in high school jazz band. And I was kind of the nerd guy, you know. I set up the projectors and I set up the PA system and I helped with the theater and hung microphones for the plays and all that kind of stuff, even though I didn't know what the heck I was doing back then. But I made it work somehow. So my job for one of these plays was to do all the sound effects. Right? And we didn't have CDs, so you could put track 1, track 2, track 3. We could either use a cassette, or my parents had bought me this really cool old reel-to-reel tape machine. And so I took this tape machine and I go down to Radio Shack. And Radio Shack had all sorts of stuff back then. You could buy whatever you wanted, you know. And so I bought this little thing that looked kind of like a stapler. And you would put your piece of tape in there. And it would cut the tape exactly at an angle. And you could match up another piece of tape cut exactly at that same angle. And you could put leader in between these songs. And so I'm sitting backstage in the dark with this little tape machine trying to figure out how the heck to do this. So I would leader off every sound effect. And then I would take a Sharpie and I would write on the little paper or plastic tape that I wanted to, this was sound effect 1 and 2 and 3, and the stage manager would call sound effect 1, and I would rock those reels, and I would line it up perfectly at that edit point, and I would hit play just in time, you know, to trigger the sound effect. And so that was my first experience with leader, and I quickly learned that you really have to pay attention and count your sound effects, because I had a few mishaps where I would, you know, maybe play a chicken when it was supposed to be a song, or, you know, those kind of things happened occasionally. But so that's one type of leader. This, and the other thing that you would do is multi-track tape. 24-track tape was still is incredibly expensive. And so in order not to waste any tape, you would put this leader tape, which was a tape that you couldn't record on. It was just blank plastic or paper tape. And that would give you every inch of your recording space. The 24-track reels of tape could only record 16 minutes. That was the maximum record length. You could buy these giant reels of tape that were twice as much that would do 32 minutes. But 16 minutes was pretty much the limit at 30 IPS, which was a tape speed. So we wanted to have as much of that time as possible. So if you could get maybe 2 or even 3 takes out of a reel of tape of the same song, you know, reel of tape was over $300 back then for one reel. That's 16 minutes. And if you record a song 3 times and you're doing an album that's got 10 or 12 songs on it, then it gets real expensive real quick, right? So that was another way that we could save tape. And right when we would get to the end of the first song, we would put this piece of leader in between the two songs. And it would do two things. It would save that much tape on the reel, and it would let you know that you were recording on the right song. So if you ran around too far, this leader would go, "Tuck, tuck, 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 tuck," and you realized, oh, I'm going back into the other song, because you could easily make a mistake and record over something and erase it. So the other type of leader that we also used was sometimes you would call it pre-roll, and it was blank recording tape that we would leave blank before the song started. And it was used to synchronize tape machines. So we had these devices, right? And so you had tape machines, and you would want them to play in sync with each other. And it was for a number of reasons. For one of these could be a video tape machine, and the other one could be an audio tape machine, and you could play a picture with one tape machine and then lock your audio tape machine to picture. And the way that we did this was with something called SMPTE, right? And SMPTE is the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. It's an acronym for that. Because they developed it in the 1960s. And they developed it as a way to count frames of film for editing, right? So this SMPTE, there was an audio version of it, and it sounded kind of like a fax machine. You know, all these funny little tones, and it was just audio data. So the same way that we used to have to, back in the early computer days, we would have a little cassette tape and a little cheap cassette recorder, and we would record our audio data because you didn't have a floppy drive. You would have to save it to a cassette, and then you could play it back into the computer and reload your program. It was really complex. But it's this same type of data code that we used, and it's called LTC, right? And that was the audio version of timecode. So what you would do is you would take and you would, our mission was to try to get these machines running together the same every time. And that's called synchronizing, right? So we're trying to get the machines to play in sync. So what we would do is we would take and we would record this time code on the entire master tape and the same numbers on the entire slave tape. And this is just this audio data. And what would happen is the first machine, the master, would just run freely at its own speed. And then the second machine, the slave, would try to lock to this first machine. So the first machine spit out its SMPTE, and it spit it into this thing called a synchronizer. Right? And this was a bear of a thing to work. This particular unit worked pretty well. This is called the Timeline Lynx. And the Lynx worked pretty well, but I had one called the Zeta system, which was just a nightmare to program. But you would leave this blank tape at front because it would take a while for the slave machine to catch and lock to the master. So the way it worked is the master spit out its SMPTE time code into the synchronizer, and the slave spit out its SMPTE time code into the synchronizer. And the synchronizer would compare those two codes, and it would look at the numbers here. And it would speed up and slow down this slave tape machine to keep them in sync. So that's synchronization. The way the SMPTE works, I don't know if you are familiar with it or not. It's used a lot still in production today. It's set up. If you look at your counter actually on Pro Tools, and you scroll to your counter, and you click on your little triangle, there's something called timecode. So let me open a big counter here. So this is timecode. And the way it's divided up is it's divided up into hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And there's a bunch of different frame rates, right? There's the film uses 24 frames a second. And when we were doing music by itself, to make it simple, we would use 30 frames a second. And then there was something when color video came out, 30 frames a second was for black and white video also. But when color video came out, there was a problem. And they had to correct the frame rate by a microscopic amount. And it became 29.97 frames per second. And that was really confusing to deal with, right? So they decided, we're going to make something called drop frame. And drop frame, just every certain amount of time, would forget about one frame and the number would jump. So it made the counters work smoothly because you couldn't have a 29.97 and then 1 again, you know. So let's see here. So this time code is still used everywhere in film today, in television. So you'll see these readers in every television studio. All the film people use them. They're also used in live concerts quite a bit if you have any kind of automation. A lot of the Broadway shows, they run time code, and they will trigger their lights from automation. So every time this number gets to a certain point, a different lighting cue will trigger. They're used for rock and roll shows. My type of rock and roll, we're not on a click track, and we're not on a specific time base, so we can't use that type of thing. But more pop type of shows where they have backing tracks and backing vocals and all that, they'll run this time code, a master time code, and it can trigger everything and kind of take the job away from the technicians a little bit, you know. And you know, even plays like Lion King, you know, they don't even have a monitor mixer. They don't even have a guy mixing for the guys in the back. They have an automated console. And so when a certain number comes up, the scene changes and something happens. So, I mean, that's kind of the basics of what time code is, right? And that's where leader comes from. So what we're going to do is something similar. We're going to put a blank space in between. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to select bars and beats. And we're going to change our metronome settings. So I'm going to double click on this 2 bars here. We're going to open up our dialog box. And we're going to change our setting from, you know, only during record to during record and play. And so that way the click is playing all the time. And then we're going to turn off our count off. All right. So now when I hit play, right, we have our click playing at all times in play and record. This is the way I like to work. Some people don't want to hear the click after they record, but I'm an audio engineer and I'm an editor, and I need to make sure that things fall in time. So as an alternative to having that 2 bars click up front, what we're going to do is we're going to just basically move our data 2 bars later, but we're going to do it in a different kind of way. Right? We're going to make leader, and at this location, like let's say we want 2 bars of click. So we're going to move our data to measure 3, right?
Professor,
Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where it went, but on my interface, I don't have the box where count off is anymore.
Oh, okay.
I don't know
That's easy.
if my screen is too small or...
Yeah, so let's take a look here. So let's go over to this little triangle here on the edge of your ruler bar here. And then we're going to just turn some stuff off. You can turn off transport so you have more room, right? But what you want to see are these MIDI controls. You can turn off, synchronization. You can even turn off your output meters if you want. But these MIDI controls is what you need to have checked so you can see it. And if you still can't see it, turn off your zoom controls. You can turn those off because we're using shortcuts, right? And that'll give you more room up here in your menu bar.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You see it now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. So since we have our click playing all the time, we need a way to turn it on and off easily. And there's two ways. First, you can just click on the button here, right, and turn it on and off. But there's also a shortcut, which is the 7 on the numeric keypad. So if you have an extended keyboard, you can just press 7 and turn it on and off. So we're going to move this data to measure 3. And what we want to do is have our grid mode. And I'm just going to put it on 1 bar because we're not going to be doing any fine increments. I'm going to click on measure 3 up here in the ruler bar, and I'll get my cursor on measure 3. Right. And then we're going to use a new window here. We're going to use time operations. Okay, and that's in the event menu, time operations window. So in this window, there are quite a few different submenus like we had in the transpose and quantize window, right? So we have change meter, we have insert time, cut time, and move song start. Change meter is obvious. If you wanted to change your meter, you could use this time operation window and tell it where you want it to start. And it usually follows where you click on the screen. So if I click on measure 2, you'll see 2 here. So that's one thing. The next one is insert time. So let's say that I was working on this song and I wanted to, I have 2 bars and then I have my next 2 bars. I want to insert some blank time in between there so I can put a new piece of music. Maybe this is my verse and my chorus and I want to put a ramp in between or whatever the reason. So I want to insert some new time. I put my cursor at measure 3 and I can drag and select how much time I want to insert. So if I want to insert 2 bars, I select 2 bars and then I come here and I hit apply. And my data has moved over and I have 2 additional bars there. So it just stops, 2 bars free. And then we have our song coming back in again. Right? So that's cut time, and that can be really useful. Maybe you've made an entire arrangement and you want to cut out a section and you want it to collapse back. You can use this cut time command to do that. The other way to cut it just on one track is to go into shuffle mode. And you can just hit delete and it'll just cut it on one track, but I was wrong about it. So cutting time affects the entire song. And you want to try to make sure you're always in grid when you do this stuff. Right? Now we're going to do cut time. So cut time is just going to delete whatever you have selected. Right? And so it's cutting it across the entire song. All right? And then the window that we want is move song start. So I'm going to go back to my ruler bar and I'm going to click on measure 3. And I want to make sure that I have bars and beats selected. Okay. So now I have bars and beats selected. Starting at measure 3, we're going to move our song start to this measure. And we're going to renumber the bars. Okay, so now I'm going to hit apply. And our song has now moved to measure 3, but our bars have a 0 and a -1. So our first bar is actually -1 in our counter. So there's a shortcut, obviously, like everything else in Pro Tools, to get to this time operations window, right? And that's Option and the number 1 on the numeric keypad, and that brings it up. So this type of technique has several advantages over just standard using the count off. For one thing, if a musician comes in early, you're going to have that recorded. So when you start recording, if I put the drums in record here and I start recording, anywhere he plays during the count off is still going to be recorded, right? And then the other thing is, if you have a chart that has pickups into measure 1, you can have those pickups recorded, and your song still starts at measure 1. So that means that your bar numbers in your sequencer are corresponding with your bar numbers in your chart, on your chart. Right? So I'm just going to kind of quickly do this one more time, just very quickly. So I'm going to revert to saved here. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off our count off. We're going to double click on the 2 bars up here at the top. We're going to select play during record and play, click during record and play, and we're going to hit OK. That gives us our click at all times. Right? We can turn the click on and off either up here in this section by pressing this button. Okay. Or we can use the number 7 on the numeric keypad and just toggle it on and off with that. Right? We have our move song start here and our time operations in the event menu. Time operations window has several features. We can change meters. We can insert blank time. We can cut time. And we can move the song start. So we're going to move the song start. I'm going to be in grid mode. I'm going to select measure 3 because that's where I want it to start. I'm going to select renumber song to start at measure 1. And I'm going to hit apply. And that moves my data. And that gives me these negative numbers at the front of my song. There's another shortcut way to do this, and that is, I undo this. I'm back at the top now. You see this little diamond shape box up here, this little diamond next to our tempo? That is your song start. So provided you're in grid mode, you can just grab that little thing and pull it over, and your bars renumber. Right, so there we are, bar 1 is starting 2 bars in, and we have a bar -1. Alrighty? So that's 2 different ways to do it. If you're not in grid mode, you can get in a weird space. So let me undo that and show you what can happen. If you're in slip mode and you start grabbing this, then you're going to be at some random number when you return to 0. Right? So I hit back to the top and I'm at beat 0, or bar 0, beat 2, and 730 ticks. And sometimes people accidentally grab this and they end up with something like this, and they're confused and can't figure out how to get their bars straightened back out. If you just grab this and drag it back to 1, then you're good. You can also use this to set like time code settings. You can have your bar 1 start at a certain time code amount, right? So if we look at our time code and we wanted bar 1 to start at, I'm looking at this little counter up here, by the way. We wanted our bar 1 to start, at 1 hour. You could drag this and have bar 1 start at exactly a certain point in a timeline. And that's when you're doing movie scoring and you want to have your cue start at a particular time in the movie, right? So that's another way to do it. And you can do it if you quantize to, or not quantize, if you grid to time code. You see, when I switch my counter, this grids go away from notes and they become time code. So if I set my time code to, like 1 hour, I could, do the same type of thing and place this music wherever I wanted on a timeline, in a real time type of thing. So we're not. That's just some little extra knowledge, right? We don't need that right now. But I'm just kind of showing you what's possible with this window. All right, so I'm going to go back and we're going to go back to grid mode. I'm going to go back to my counter, that's bars and beats. All right, my grid is 1 measure. I'm going to go to measure 3. I'm going to click and I'm going to renumber to start at measure 1 and I'm going to hit apply. And so we're back to where we started. Everybody clear on that? Because this is kind of important. It's I use this all the time. This is the only way I work, because when you're working with other players, you need to make sure that you're in control of the whole situation. So the other thing I'll show you about that click on and off, which is kind of cool, is, like I said, I'm recording other players most of the time for a living. So if we're playing along and we get to the last bar, let's turn on the click. Right? You don't want to hear those clicks afterwards. So by using the shortcut keys, when we get to the last bar, I will just manually turn off the click. Because sometimes there's retards at the end of the song. Sometimes there's other reasons that you don't want to hear the click. So let's move on to tempo changes. So if you look at our ruler bar here, right, we've done some basic tempo changes in the past, right? There's this little tempo bracket here. And let's go ahead and insert a couple of tempo changes. So let's just randomly speed it up and slow it back down and see how the music feels. So we're starting at 84 beats, right, per minute. And so at this measure 2, I'm just going to insert a tempo change. And you do that by clicking on this little plus. And then this dialog comes up. And you type what tempo you want. Let's go for, let's make it so we can hear it, 88. Right? And let's just put a couple of them in right now. And then maybe here we'll go up a little faster. Let's go to, I don't know. 92. And then let's say for the end of the song, we wanted to start slowing back down. So here I'll insert another tempo, right, with this little plus. And let's go back to 84 here. And then maybe we want a retard at the end. So I'm going to switch my grid to half note. And maybe for this last chord, we're going to make a pretty grand retard, or maybe, actually, let's put the retard here. Now, if I want to edit this number that I've already entered, I can double-click on the little triangle here, and it'll bring back up my dialog box. And so I'm going to slow this way down. Let's bring it down to, 68. Right? And then maybe a beat later, let's bring it down to 58. Right? So we're changing the tempo, but the MIDI, you see it expanding every time we change the tempo, right? That's because there's more space in between the subdivisions, And this is a time ruler. So as we slow down, there's more space in between the quarter notes. So let's take a listen to what we did. So that's kind of emulating a more conducted type of track, right? So that's kind of one way to make this happen. But if you go over to your same tempo ruler here, you'll see a little triangle beside it. And if you click on that triangle, it opens up our tempo editor. So if you look at this tempo editor window, first of all, make sure that your resolution is set all the way to the bottom to follow metronome click. Otherwise, it gets really squirrely. Right. So our editor window has the same type of bars and arrows that our other windows have. You know, you can scroll up and down and see our tempo. You can move it with the arrows. And you can zoom in and out. And if you look over here on this side, you'll see a visual representation of the zoom level of the tempos. So if I were to zoom all the way out, tempo goes all the way to 1,000 beats a minute, right? So we don't need that. We're just working in a small range, so I'm going to zoom in so we can do some finer increments. So I'm just going to undo all these tempos we just put in. And I'm just hitting undo multiple times. And so what we can do now with this tempo editor is we can make things more musical and more gradual. So I'm going to take and I'm going to use my pencil tool, which you can either use the key command F10 or you can just click on it. And I'm going to drag down and I'm going to select line. Right. And now what I can do is for my ending, you know, I want it to get slower gradually. I want it to move down. And as I'm doing this, if you look right here, there's a little representation of what you're drawing. Right. So I'm going to undo that. And then if you can watch on my screen, you'll see that it moves there. So I'm just going to pick a spot, and I'm going to just drag down, and maybe I'll bring it down to, let's do, 60-something. So that means my tempo is starting here at 84, and then it's gradually slowing down to 60. And then maybe for the last chord, I'm going to actually, let me redo that. I kind of did that sloppily. I'm going to actually bring it right down to that last chord and put it around 60-something. Right. So maybe for the very last chord, maybe I want to slow it down a little more. So I'm going to just pull that down just a little more for that last chord. And you can draw these in however you like. And then maybe the beginning of the song, I want to start slower, and I want it to ramp up and get faster. So I can make whatever shape, just like editing velocity, just like editing MIDI volume, any of that type of stuff. You can just draw it in here. And now we have something like this. I'll turn on the click so you can hear it. So you can really conduct your piece, and you can really make it musical. So that type of classical or film scoring music, the conducted type of music, is one reason to use this. The other reason is to, like everything else, we're working with synthesizers, and we're trying to give our music some life, right? And if you listen to old albums from the 70s and 80s, they didn't use click tracks back then. And you can listen to a song and it might start at one tempo and end, 6 or 8 or 10 beats a minute faster, right? And it was a human thing. Musicians got excited and they started playing faster. Or maybe your verse would be at a slower tempo, and when you would get to the chorus, you'd want a little lift. And so you would speed up a little bit on the chorus, and then you'd settle back down on the verses, right? And this fluctuation is another way that you can make things more musical. Oh
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to adjust the tempo, or rather adjust the placement of the beats along the timestamp? Say if you're following an audio track and you want to adjust the beats so they fall on specific sections of the audio.
Yeah, we're going to get into that with audio quite a bit, Noam. So we'll be doing some editing exercises that will really demonstrate that. But absolutely, the short answer is you can select a spot, and you can go up here to your event operations, and you can say, here it's down here, identify beat. So if this particular spot was a beat, I've another funny little story. One time I was at home, and I was living in North Salem, New York, in Westchester up there. And I get this call on the telephone. And it's, "Hello, Ken. This is Donny Osmond," right? And I don't know if you guys are probably too young to know who the Osmonds are, right? And so I said, "Oh, come on, man." I said, I know this is not Donny. Who is this? Who's calling me, And it's Donny Osmond, right? And so what had happened is he had he was working with this producer I used to work with a lot, and a great guy. He's passed on now. His name was Phil Ramone. And Phil had recommended me for this job without telling me. And so I'm getting a phone call at my house on my landline, and it's Donny Osmond there, And what had happened is he was doing a concert, and he wanted to sing to his television show that he did when he was a kid. And they had come up with a way to kind of separate the voice and the orchestra, right? But nothing was done to a click back then for that television show. And he wanted to align and have the orchestra have a click track so the live orchestra could play along with the television orchestra, and the kid's voice could jump in and out, and all this complicated stuff for his live show. So what I had to do was I had a piece of audio, and the waveform is there, and I had to find every downbeat of every measure for the entire hour and a half concert or whatever it was. And I had to label every one of those beats, like I was showing you, calling identifying beat. And so what you do is you just put your cursor on the very first downbeat, and then you say identify beat, that's measure 1, beat 1. You put your cursor on find the waveform spot, you find the second spot, you put your cursor there, you say identify beat, that's measure 1, beat 2. Right? So I did this project for an hour and a half long concert, and it worked out great. It was this was back in early Pro Tools. It was so much less advanced than it is now. So sorry, I got a little sidetracked there, but it was very funny that I had Donny call me at my house, and I almost hung up on him because I thought it was just somebody joking with me. Okay, so that's kind of basics of tempo changing, right? So any questions about that? Because this is pretty crucial, to be able to work with this kind of stuff and insert your tempos and change things around. And on the next assignment, I'm going to ask you to do this kind of stuff. So I really want to make sure everybody understands it. Okay? So if you have any questions, jump in there now. Or jump in there at any time. I don't mind answering questions whenever. The next one is how to change meters. So I'm going to just close our tempo thing back down here by clicking on that little triangle again. And the same type of thing for meter. So you see our meter ruler here. And if you don't have all of these things showing up in your ruler, by the way, I'm in LA, and it's actually raining and thundering, which hasn't happened maybe since I moved here 2 years ago. So I don't know what the heck's going on, but I'm glad. We need water so bad out here with all the fires and everything. It's awesome. So next we're going to do meter change. So it's the same exact principle. Right, so if we want to have, we have a measure of 4/4 we're starting with. Let's go to the second bar, and I'm going to just insert a meter change. And that'll bring up this little dialog box. Right, and I'm going to change to 2/4 here. Okay, so now you see that the bar lines have, this is a measure of 4/4, and this is a measure of 2/4. So the bold markers have actually doubled up because we have 2 beats in a measure instead of 4 beats in a measure. And I think most of you have musical backgrounds. If you don't understand any of this stuff, I'll jump right in there. But I also don't want to over-explain stuff that people already know. Right? So I've inserted a measure of 2/4, and then I'm going to go here another 4 beats later. And I'll make a measure of 4/4. Right? And, I erased my tempo stuff. Let me just draw something back in. I want to show you one other thing. So let's say we have our retard here at the end, our grand retard. And as this slows down, the clicks get very far apart. Let me make it more, just so I can make my demonstration. So if we're listening to our click track, right, the clicks, because it's such a slow tempo, there's a lot of wiggle room in there to not know where your next note's going to be because it's slowing down gradually. So another thing you can do with this meter track is I can select, I'm going to measure 5 now because I have my little retard. And maybe for the last measure, I want to insert a meter change with my plus. I'm going to hide this tempo thing one more time. So I'm going to insert another meter change. And maybe for these last couple of measures, or this last measure, I want my click track to double up in tempo. And so I want to hear 1/8 notes. So I'm going to make another measure of 4/4. I don't really need to change the meter, but this is a way that you can, on the fly, change your metronome resolution to 1/8 notes. So I'm going to select that. And I'm going, now if we listen, right? So that would be like a conductor beating double time for you, so you could follow the tempo better.
Can you show how to do that one more time?
Absolutely. So you got the meter change part, right? How to insert meter changes with the plus, right? So let's delete this last one. I'm going to just undo. And we have our retard here, our grand retard. And so I'm going to select where I want another meter change, right? I'm in 4/4, right? But if you look at my 4/4 over here, if you want to edit any of this stuff, you just double click on it, right? And you can edit it. But if you look at my 4/4 bar, you'll see that the click is set to quarter note. Right? So I'm going to come to this bar and I'm going to insert another meter change. I'm going to click on the little plus by the meter ruler. And I'm going to bring up my meter change dialog box. And I'm going to select 1/8 note. So now I have another measure of 4/4, but the click resolution is now an 1/8 note as opposed to a quarter note. And this is crucial stuff when you're trying to work with live musicians. Like if you have an entire track recorded and you want to overdub an orchestra, the conductor can help conduct, but even for the conductor to be able to hear those 1/8 notes at a very slow tempo is very, very helpful.
So don't screw up the click track that you're sending out to your orchestra.
Absolutely not. Orchestras are very expensive, and Yeah, everything has to be ready to go. My buddy, I don't know if I told you this story. My buddy is a bass player. I might have told you. I don't remember. But he's a bass player here in LA. His name is Carlitos Del Puerto. And he's an amazing player. And he did a Disney session the other day. Did I tell you guys this story? No? Okay. So he hadn't been doing Disney sessions. He's played with everybody. I mean, first of all, his father was a famous Cuban bass player, and he moved to the United States and just kind of took over L.A. And he's played with Herbie Hancock. He's played with Chick Corea. He's played with all the big jazz artists. He played with Barbra Streisand. He does orchestral dates. He plays in the best salsa bands. He plays baby bass. He just does everything on the bass. Just phenomenal. Electric bass. Incredible, any style. So he gets called in to do a Disney session. And the way that it works is there's no rehearsal. There's no run through. There's no anything. You have a click track and they say go and you play. And he said it was the most insane music he had ever tried to read. It was like a measure of 4/4, a measure of 13/8, a measure of, 9/16, another measure of 2/4, and then maybe you had 2 bars of 3/4. And he said just impossible to read. And he said, I made it through it. He said, but the point is that studio time with that orchestra and those triple, quadruple scale musicians per minute is so friggin' expensive that they will not even have rehearsal. They won't even do a run through. It's go, and if you do it, you're hired back. If you screw it up and you cause the orchestra to have to play more, then you won't get the call again, So that's the importance of the click track being good, I guess. Okay, so we changed our meter. Let's take a little look at our click plugin here, this Click 2 plugin. So the interface on this is, it looks pretty simple, right? And so you see this little button here that says follow meter. Okay, so that means that when we change from quarter note to eighth note, it's going to follow whatever we program in to this meter track, like we just did with the quarter notes and eighth notes, right? If you click on this little follow meter, it bypasses all of this, right? And so now if I hit play, it's just going to play whatever these settings are. So if you do all this meter programming and it's not working, it's because you have to have on this little follow meter light. And there's one other thing that I want to show you. It's the same with the conductor track, with the tempo track. If you turn off this conductor track, it's just going to set your tempo to wherever you have it set in the session. And so you can change your tempo up here, right? But it's not going to do any of the retards or anything we already did. So if your conductor track stops working, it's because that's not turned on. So those are two little quick bypasses. Sometimes if a band changes tempo or in between songs, or whatever, you might just want to try, you don't want to mess up the tempo track that's going on, and you want to try some different tempos. So you just turn this off for a while and you play and you find your tempo. And I told you guys how to find your tempo easily, right? You just click on the number and then you tap the T key. There we go. So if you have your tempo change dialog open and you want to find a tempo, you can just tap. So I'm just tapping on the T key, and that's changing my tempo. And so let's continue on with this window here. There's also another thing that if you were to mute the click track and play the song, you can see that there's a little light here. So a lot of times for shows, drummers might use the light, or conductors might use the light because they don't want the click playing. It's distracting in the music. So if you mute your click track up here in the audio settings, right, this light will still flash. In time with the music. Now, if you mute your click track by turning it off here, or using the 7, like I showed you, the number 7, then I believe that light doesn't work anymore. Yeah. So now this click is totally turned off, so it's not going to flash the light. Okay. So let's turn this back on. So this click track, this click plugin, Click 2, has a lot of different sounds, and you can go through here and look for days, but there's all these different types of click sounds, and they're useful for different things. And there's always an accented version and an unaccented version of each one. So the accent would be going on the downbeat, and the Click 2 accent would be the subdivisions. So this is a cowbell. And you can take and you can adjust the volume. Like if you don't want to have so much accent, you can do that. The other thing you can do is you can set both of these sounds to the same thing. So if I set both of them to cowbell unaccented, then all the clicks are going to sound the same. Right? There's no more accent. So one thing about click tracks is you want to be very careful when you're recording soft instruments, like if you're recording a voice, or if you're recording a drummer who cranks up his headphones super loud, that you don't get the click sound coming from the outside of your headphones back in the microphone, because that's called click bleed. And that can destroy a recording. And if you're recording someone and you're not aware of that, or you're not listening careful because you're trying to produce, you can get back to your house and have this click track in the actual instrument coming from the headphones, and it's pretty much useless. And there's actually some great recordings in the 90s that at the end of the song, they hit the last chord, and you can, if you listen close enough, you can hear that click bleed in there. And they just didn't catch it or didn't have the way to re-record it, or the artist said, "I'm sorry, I played it great. You do whatever you have to make it right," So you can change your sounds. What I kind of recommend, and there's all sorts of stuff in here, like I said, if you go to Classic, there's something called the UREI Click. And this was an old analog click machine that we had in the studios before we were using sequencers. And it was just basically a metronome that you could plug in and the musicians would hear it. And the sound of this is, it's like this. Right? So it's just a pulse. And this type of sound is very good for not bleeding in headphones. Right? So this is the one that I like, this UREI Click. So if you wanted to set this the way you like and use the UREI Click, and you wanted to save that patch, you can go to Presets and Save Setting As. And go ahead and do this with me if you're open, have your session open, because I'm going to show you something. So you save your setting as, and when you save it, it will default to this hierarchy, which is inside your Documents folder, and then there's a Pro Tools folder, and then there's a Plugin Settings folder, and then for every plugin you have, there will be a separate folder. Right? So you see that hierarchy? That's so users, your user group, this is my user, Documents, Pro Tools, right? Plugin Settings, and it's in the click there. You usually don't need to get to it, but I just wanted to show you where it was. This is where a lot of the Pro Tools specific things are in this Documents folder. So we're going to take and we're going to save this patch, and we'll just call it Uri. All right. I'm going to hit save. And so now this patch comes up as a preset. And so with this preset, let's just go ahead and make another one just so I can show you. I'm going to make one that's a block preset too. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to save as, and we'll call this block. So now I have two different presets, a block and a Uri. So I know that I always want to use the Uri click, and I like to be consistent with the musicians. If you use one song, you're using one type of click, and then use another type of click for another song. Maybe one's going to be louder or distracting or bleed more. So I like to be real consistent about that. So what I want to do is I want to set this up so the Uri click always comes up when I open the session. And the way you do that is you select what you want. So I'm going to select Uri. And then I'm going to go to presets, and I'm going to say set as user default. And this works the same way with other types of presets like EQs and even synthesizers and instruments, right? So I'm going to set as user default. So that means that this is my default user setting. And then there's one more step to make it open all the time. And that's if you go down all the way to the bottom. Can you guys see this? Should I zoom in? If you go down all the way to the bottom, I'm clicking on this little presets arrow. You go down the bottom and you go to settings preference, set plugin default to user setting. So we've made a user default, and now we're telling this plugin that we want that to come up whenever we have a new whenever we open a new click track. So I'm going to set it to user setting. So now my Uri is my user click track. If I switch over to block, and I'm using the block, and then I open a new session, I'm not going to open a new session, but I'll open the plugin again so you can see. And I go down to instrument and I select my click 2. It comes up as Uri because I've made that my user default. And that's really useful in a lot of different things. Somebody always wants to have a piano patch on their MIDI Grand. And on their MIDI Grand, they like this certain sound. Well, you can do the same thing here in that same type of hierarchy. First, you save your patch, and then you make it your user default, which is grayed out right now. And then you select that as set plugin default to user setting. All right. So I guess I also wanted to talk to you. A few people were having a little trouble staying on the click. And there's a few different techniques to being able to play with a click track. It's not something that's natural. I mean, you're used to playing with a metronome. But there's also this red light fear. Whenever you hit record, oh, I'm going to make a mistake. And so you get nervous, and then you rush the first downbeat or whatever. And it basically just breaks down to learning to subdivide before you play. And when I was studying bass in college, my teacher taught me, no matter what I was playing, to think subdivisions. And so I could be playing whole notes and I'm thinking 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and it puts you more in the groove and it makes you more focused to where the downbeats are, right? So the same type of thing here, when you're playing with a click and you start the song to record. So what am I thinking in my head during this time? I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to subdivide first. So the first couple of beats, I'm kind of 2 and 3 and 1E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and I get the tempo in my head first, right? And then I'll also think about the part that I'm going to play. So when I start the click, maybe I'll think bung gung 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 gung, and really get the phrasing that I'm going to play in my head before I hit the record button, or before in that 2 bars count off. And if you really focus on that and work on your subdivision in your head and think about your part, you'll be able to punch in. And not only at the beginning of a song, forget about the beginning. If you're trying to punch in the middle of a song, right, and you're trying to play a hard lick or something, you want to be able to be focused on that type of subdivision and be able to instantly perform and play in time. And it's basic stuff, and I understand that. And I'm sorry if I'm being redundant for you guys, but everybody's on different levels here, and I'm just trying to get everybody happy. So it's really helpful to have markers or memory locations in your song so you can see visually the sections of the song. Right? I'm going to delete some of this stuff here. We don't need all this tempo stuff anymore. And you can delete the tempo stuff just by dragging in your ruler and hitting delete. Right? Actually, you know what I'm going to do is, no, I'll just get rid of that. Oh, that's another one. By the way, if you want to edit something, right, you can double click on the triangle like I told you. Most of the time in Pro Tools, if you want to get rid of something, you can hold down the Option key, and you see the finger has a little minus beside it. So if I wanted to delete this tempo, I just hold down the Option key and I can click on it. If I want to delete these meter changes, I can just Option click on them and they delete. So that's an easy way to clean stuff up. And that works in so many different windows. Works in the marker window too, I'll show you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about markers in the memory location window. Okay? So the memory location window is Command and the number 5 on your keyboard. Or you can go to your window menu and you can scroll down and just select it. So we're going to open this little window here and let me kind of show you what's going on here. So you have these columns like the other windows, right? And if you don't see all of these things, all of this is adjustable here in this little arrow. So you can set your view filter to show whatever you want it to show. And we're going to go through what all these things are, but just so you know, you can adjust things there. And yours might look like this. I'm not sure how I sent the session. And you may not have bars and beats showing, and that's something we need to see. Right? So we're going to show main counter, and that'll bring up this little bars and beats. And if you want to change it from bars and beats to minutes and seconds or to time code or whatever, you can just click on that little triangle. So let's go back to the top and let's just set up some memory locations here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select my piece. I'm going to delete this blank time here at the end. And I'm going to double click on this. I'm in grid mode, obviously, in grid mode, right? I'm going to double click this and we're going to duplicate our regions like we've done in the past, exactly. So I'm just doing the same thing we've already done. You can double click on it to select it and you can hit Command D and duplicate and just hit as many of those as you want. So let's set up some markers. We're going to pretend like this is a full-length song here. Maybe I'll... at the very beginning, I'd want a marker that says I'm at the very top, at the beginning of the click track or the count off, right? So you can make markers a couple of different ways. First of all, you just go here and make a new memory location. So I've already rewound to the beginning of the piece. I'm at measure -1, and I want to make a marker that tells me where my count off is. So I'm going to just label this count off. And then maybe we'll pretend like this is my intro. So I'm going to make a new marker. And we'll call this intro. And then you can go through your piece and do the same type of thing, right? So that's, by clicking on this little menu, that's the slow way to do it. Okay. The quick way to work is to just press the enter key. So if you want a marker here at measure 5, and maybe this is going to be our verse, I'll just hit the enter key on the extended keyboard, and then I will name this verse, and then you hit enter again to make it so. All right. So we're going to go to the next one. We'll make this our ramp into the chorus. I'm just going to hit the enter key. I'm going to type in ramp, and I'm going to hit enter again. And then we have a chorus, right? So you can quickly go through and set up all of your markers. And it's so fast, in fact, I'll undo these. When I'm working in the studio, I can set this up in advance of even hearing the song just by reading the chart. Or I can let the musicians play a take, and while they're playing, sorry, I'll go back to the top. So that's my count off. I can do this in real time. So I get to measure 1, intro, enter. Then I'm going to come up to our next marker. This is going to be my verse, enter. Right? So it only takes one pass through to set all your markers. And it's incredibly useful for so you get the idea. So it's incredibly useful for editing and for communicating with the other players. So you want to be able to easily say, ooh, go to verse 2, and you want to be able to click right there, and boom, you're in verse 2. There's no wasting time. You're trying to move quickly and keep. My job as an engineer, and I don't know if I've said this to you or not, but my job as an engineer is to get the best sounds I possibly can and be as invisible as I can unless I'm needed. And that type of mentality enables the musicians to just keep with the flow. You don't want to be distracting. You don't want to be asking a lot of questions. You don't want to say, where was verse 2? Well, it's about 37 seconds in. Well, you're digging around. You're trying to find it. That's unacceptable. So the other thing I want to show you about this is you really need to be in grid mode. So if you look at our memory locations right here, you'll see that every one of these are exactly on the beat. So this measure 1, beat 1, 0 ticks. Measure 5, beat 1, 0 ticks. Right? So those are exactly in time. If I do the same thing and I go to slip mode, all of these markers are going to be just random, So if I hit one here, I'm not even going to name it. I'll just hit a couple. Right? You'll see that they're not in time. So now my markers are a little bit off. They're not on the beat. They're, this is 61 ticks, 85 ticks. These are not exactly on the beat. So what that means is if you select a marker and you start playing, it's going to not play exactly starting from a beat, and that's confusing. So now I have all these markers I messed up. I could either redo them all, or I can fix it just by going to grid. And then I'm just going to take my marker, I'm going to drag it forward, and I'll drag it back, and it'll snap to the grid. And now you can see that all my ticks are at 0. Right? I'm kind of flying through this stuff because I don't want it to be boring for you guys, but let me know if there's any questions about this. Does everybody understand how these are set and how they're used?
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you show me how you got to that memory location window one more time?
Absolutely. First of all, you can just go to your window menu, and you can select memory locations. Almost everything that you need to get to as far as editors or windows are in this window menu. And then the other ones are over here in the events usually.
Another quick question.
Sure.
So my markers, my memory locations, are not snapping to the grid.
And you have your grid on?
And I have my grid on.
Okay. So you mean you've already entered them in and they're not at 0, right?
Right.
And if you take them and you drag them forward and then you drag them back, they don't snap to the grid?
Right.
Interesting.
Oh, wait a second. I'm on shuffle. That's the problem. That'll do it.
Shuffle.
So I was looking at grid in a different place, where in the middle of your screen on the top.
I understand.
The word grid I was looking at.
I did the same thing the other day. I'm like, I just turned the grid off. No, I didn't. I just turned off the bar lines, So yes, I totally understand. No problem.
Got it. All good now. Thank you.
All right. Great. So this window is really powerful, this memory locations window. All right. So I'm going to show you a few more tricks. I'm going to just hit enter so I can bring up the dialog box and show you what else we can do. I didn't talk about these columns though. So obviously we have the marker number, right? So marker 1, 2, and 3. And then we have our names. Then we have where it's occurring. And then we have these little symbols. And these symbols mean different things. And we're going to go through what all these mean in just a moment. But that's kind of the grid. If you have a marker and you want to edit it, if you hold down the Control key, you'll see the cursor turns into a pencil. So you can just click on that marker and you can change the name. Right. One other thing about markers that's really useful in a session is don't give these things long names, because when you zoom way out, you won't be able to read them. I don't have many markers here, but if I had a bunch of markers, you wouldn't be able to see them. So the way I name things is generally as short as humanly possible. So count off would be CO, right? Verse 1 would be V1, right? And then I have another one here, and this is ramp 1, so R1. And then I have a chorus here, C1 or CH1, right? And name them as short as you can in whatever type of abbreviations you want to use, just so you know what they are. I have a drummer friend of mine that whenever I work with him, he wants me to type in the length of the section into the marker also. So this would be V1, and it's 4 bars long, so I would do V1-4B, 4 bars, right? That type of thing. So whatever kind of shorthand makes your life easier, you can enter it in like that. So we have this marker here, and if I want to edit it, I hold down the Control key and I click on it, and I can change the name. If I want to delete a marker, I'll delete location number 2. You hold down the Option key, and the pencil turns into a little eraser, the same way it did up here, right? We wanted to erase something. We had a little minus sign by our hand. And now we want to erase something, so we can just hold down the Option key and click on it, and it'll delete it. So I hope this is helpful, this clearer screen, right? You guys are able to see what I'm doing finally, right? It's better. If I need to zoom in, if you still can't see areas or whatever, let me know. I haven't been doing as much zooming today. So let's go to our screen again, and let's take a look. I'm just going to hit enter, and let's see what else is here. So the next thing is you can not only save a stationary position like a marker, You can also save a selection. So if I selected this region, right, I can hit enter, and it brings up my memory locations dialog box. And what I can do, instead of making a marker, I can save a selection. Okay, we'll call this first one. And when you do that, it doesn't show up in the markers ruler anymore, but it's here in your list. And you can see that it's a different kind of icon. So now we can tell that this is a marker and this is a selection. So if we wanted to, we could set this. Well, let me explain why you would want to use selections to save selections. When I'm mixing a project, I'll have my 2 bars count off, and I'll have a chord at the end of the song that maybe rings over a certain amount. And so maybe my chord ends here, and my song starts here. And every time I make a recording of this to send to a client to listen to, I want to be able to send him the same length. I want it to always start in the same place and end in the same place. So by saving a selection, I'm hitting enter, and I'm moving it from marker to selection. I could name this, I'll call it, what I like to call it is bounce. Bounce selection. So now no matter what I do, I can work on the song, and then in the future I want to make him another reference. I can click on bounce selection, and that amount of material is selected. Right? So that's another thing you can save with markers. And the way this works, unlike what I was trying to show you with cut time, this is track specific. So I could, if I save a marker here, I'm just going to edit it, and I'm going to hit enter. Right? So now when I click on this, it's going to select it on this track. If I had a track down here and I save it there, right? When I click on it, it's going to go to that track. So you can save a selection. For example, this bass player needs to play this part over or whatever. You can save a selection and it will be track specific. You can also drag across the menu bar and save a selection across all tracks. Right? Little details. I know it's a lot of fiddly stuff here today, but it's stuff I want to make sure that I cover. So you guys, when you have questions when you're working and when we start moving to audio, I want you guys to be able to do all these things.
Quick question, Professor.
Mhm.
Not entirely related, but I can't seem to scroll all the way to the left to bar -1 beat 1. And so when I put my marker in for the count off, it's at bar -1 beat 2 instead of bar -1 beat 1, and I can't seem to scroll over to, like, it just stops.
Okay,
It's like I hit a wall.
so that means that you probably, if you hit return, where does it go?
I don't have a return key.
You have to have a return key.
Oh, return. It doesn't go anywhere. What do you mean?
What
Oh,
does your
I
counter
guess it
say?
goes to the beginning,
What's it say?
but what does what say?
Your counter, does it say beat 2
Oh,
or
my-
beat 1?
On the top,
Uh-huh.
my main counter
Yeah.
is -1 1 584.
Right. So what has happened is when you did our insert time, you weren't in grid mode, I believe. That's probably what
Okay.
happened. Either that or you drug this little triangle. Okay. So if you're off like that, just grab this triangle and see if you can drag it all the way back to the beginning. The red diamond, I mean.
Okay, yeah, I can't drag it all the way to the left side. but I can drag it to the right so I can see more.
So you can't drag it to the left side.
I can drag it almost to the left, but not all the way.
Okay. So click on measure 1, right? You go to grid and click on measure 1.
Uh-huh.
And then we can go over here and we can hold down the shift key.
Okay.
And hit return. And that'll make a selection. Okay. Right?
Yep.
And then you can go and you can cut time is one way to deal with it. And you want, yeah, that should be fine. And that should bring you back. That screws up the timing though. All right, let's figure out another way to do it. Undo that. Right. So you should be able to drag this diamond and move your song start.
Yeah, for some reason my songs, I don't know what happened now, because now my song start is at -2 and the diamond is between -2 and -3. I don't know what happened.
Okay, revert to saved.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, let's revert back. I'm not sure exactly what process got you in the situation you're in.
Some sort of key command that I didn't know and I accidentally hit or something, probably.
Right. So let's revert you back to save. Let's get you caught back up here because I don't want you to have to suffer there. Right. So let me know when you're ready.
I'm sorry, how do I do that?
Oh, go to the file menu and go to revert to saved.
Okay.
And that'll bring you back to our original starting point.
Okie doke.
Right. So now you're reverted to saved. You're going to be in grid mode. You're going to click on 3. Make sure that your counter is set for bars and beats. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe you were in time code or minutes and seconds or
I'm
something.
in bars and beats now. Yep.
Okay. You're going to click on measure 3.
Mm-hmm.
Beat 1. You're going to go to your event. To your event menu, and you're going to select time operations and move song start.
Got it.
And then you're going to make sure you select renumber bars starting with 1. That little box there. And hit apply, and you should be back now.
Okay, yep.
I didn't do mine right. Let's redo mine. Okay. So now you have a -1 when you hit return. Does it go to -1.1?
Yes.
Perfect. So this is a reason, by the way, that when I'm working with anything, I'm saving multiple versions. And there's actually something that's really slick about Pro Tools. If you have your preferences set so that you're saving backups, right? It will automatically save backups for you. So you see enable session. It's under preferences, operation tab. And if you look about halfway down here, there's enable session file auto backup. And you can set this for whatever you want. I keep like the latest, 99 versions because I've got plenty of hard drive space and I'm not worried about it. You can set it to back up every 1 minute. So if you found out you screwed up somewhere, right, you can always go to your Pro Tools session folder. And if you look in your session folder, you will see this file called Session File Backups. And that will keep however many versions that you have it set for in your preferences. So if I messed up and I said, oh no, I don't want to lose any work, you could go back and you can see the time that it saved its backup here in the column. And what I do is whenever I realized I screwed up, I look at my clock on the computer immediately and see, oh, it's 6:12. So that means I can go back here and I think I screwed up and this version at 6:08 is probably fine. if you catch yourself early enough. Otherwise, you can save this session as a new version, tempo version 2, and I put, messed up or whatever in the title. I use the FU, but you guys don't have to use that. But, meaning that it's a bad file, right? But I want to keep that so I have a reference of it. Maybe I did something I want to get back from it later. So you can always go and you can reopen one of these session file backups we talked about. And once you reopen it, it'll come up looking like this. It'll have this funny title with Tempo Demo Back version 017.ptx. Rename it immediately. If you ever use these backup files, rename it immediately and save it back in your master session folder. So go ahead and open our tempo demo back up, and let's continue on with this. So we talked about marker and we talked about selection, right? And now we're going to do something different. We're going to select none, right? And if we select none, we can have this memory locations window do other tricks for us that can be really powerful and useful. And you don't have to know all these, but I just want to show you what they are quickly so you have an idea. So you can save zoom settings. And the way I'll demonstrate that, I'm going to get rid of some of these things here. Option clicking to delete. So let's say you had a section of the song you were working on and you were zoomed in like this. And you wanted to be able to get back and forth from this zoom setting. You can hit your enter key, right? It brings up our dialog box. You can name it zoom in. And you can deselect any time properties because we don't want it to have a selection or a marker, but we want it to be in this little menu. And I'm going to select zoom settings and I'll turn that to none. We'll call this zoom in. So now if I change my zoom, I can always click on this and get right back where I was. And this is useful if you're editing a certain piece of music or a certain cue within a film, right? So you just have this one little piece of audio and you want to be able to zoom. And you can make as many of those as you want. You can have a zoom in for there. You can have, and this is not changing the location. This is only changing the zoom amount. So like hitting R and T, but it's a set zoom amount. So that's one little trick you can do. So pre-roll and post-roll, we haven't talked about that. We'll get into that with audio. And I'll show you one other thing. When you save a zoom setting, you'll see here in the column that it doesn't have a marker icon and it doesn't have a selection icon. It's only got a zoom icon. And what can happen if you're doing these kind of fancier memory locations, you can forget to turn off a marker or forget to turn off the selection button, and you'll see the little icon here. I'll show you. So if I forgot to turn off marker, you can visually look and say, oh, well, my zoom has a marker too, right? And so I can just control click on that, bring up my dialog and turn off the marker, and then it becomes just a zoom again. So you can have these things stacked. You can do multiple things with each memory location. And the way you recall these memory locations quickly, the way you can work really fast, is you just hit on the numeric keypad, you can hit the decimal point, the number of Q that you want to go to. We'll go to Q number 3. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to hit decimal point 3 decimal point, and that'll recall that memory location. Decimal point 4 decimal point takes me to another memory location. 5 is another one. So it's really quick. So right here in this one hand, you can control all of these different things. You've got your enter key to make your markers. You have your recall of your memory locations. And when you set it up, if you set up your song in order, you can easily know to go to the first verse at recall number 2 and the chorus at recall number 3, or however you have it set up. Okay, so we talked about zoom, and we said we're going to skip on pre-roll right now. You can also do something called track visibility, and we haven't really gotten into this too much, but what I'm going to do to demonstrate is I'm going to duplicate my piano track a bunch of times. And we're going to pretend like this is a big multi-track session. All right, so I'm just going to right-click on my track, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to find duplicate, and I'm going to say duplicate 20 times. Okay. So now I have a ton of tracks here. And we're going to pretend like this is a band that I'm recording, and maybe the first 10 tracks are drums. So I'm just going to color them so I can tell easily that they're drums. And then maybe I have a bass mic and a bass DI. And so I'll color those. And then maybe I have guitars here. Maybe I got 4 tracks of guitar. Color those. And then the rest are my vocals. Okay, so I have a session set up here. So when you're editing audio especially, and you're trying to work on an instrument like the drums, when you have a lot of tracks, it gets very small, and it's not very easy to just kind of, scroll up and down all the time and find the tracks that you want, right? So what you can do is you could show and hide tracks. Okay, so the way you do that is over here in our column here for our tracks. We have those same little dots that we had down in our MIDI editor. And if I only want to show my drum tracks, maybe I can just see, where does the bass start? Bass starts at 11, so I see 11 here, right? I can just turn off all these tracks by quickly dragging down, and now I'm only showing my purple tracks. Right? So that way I'm only editing my drums. And I can save that type of view as a memory location also. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to, instead of zoom, I'm going to turn off marker and turn off this section. I'm going to say track visibility. And then maybe I'll make another one that is everything. And I make sure, because this reverts back and it puts a marker there, you have to turn it off every time. Right, so now I have 2 different shortcuts. Memory locations. I'm going to bring up my memory location window by pressing Command 5. And I didn't name this one, but this is my drums up here. So now I can toggle back and forth between showing my drums or all my tracks. And that's a really quick way to work. And you can take it a step further. If let me relabel this drums. Right? You can also save your track height. So if you're working with waveforms, which we'll get into next week, you need to zoom in order to see your editing, right? So not only can you save your drums as a view recall, you can also resize them and save that as well. So I'm going to show my track visibility, and I'm going to save my track heights. Okay. And then I'll go to my all, and I'll change my heights here. And then I can edit this, and I'm going to include track heights. And so now when I go back and forth between drums and all, the entire view changes. Okay, this is not stuff I'm testing you on. I'm just showing you what's possible in this type of window and how you can use these tools to make your sessions flow better. Okay. Everybody kind of clear on that? I mean, and we'll go over the last two later. You know, you can do window configurations too. Pro Tools allows you to set up window configurations, so you can arrange your windows in whatever way you want, and you can save them as a new configuration. You know, you can have one like this, and then you can have one, however, whatever kind of configuration you want to make, and you can save as another configuration, new configuration, and you can toggle back and forth between configurations. I'm just showing you this so I can be thorough about what the memory locations does. And then when you look at configurations, you'll see you have two different window sets. Okay, so that's what this other part of memory locations is. If you look here, you can see window configuration, and you can set to 1 and 2 and save that as a location too, as a memory location. All right, guys, I know that's a lot of stuff there, but I think this is a very, very powerful part of Pro Tools, and the more you start using Pro Tools, the more you can take advantage of this. And I just want to show you a few of my tricks to make things work smoothly. One other thing is auto scrolling. So if you're playing and your song gets to the end, it will jump to the next page so you can see. Right? Sometimes you don't want that. That's called page auto scrolling, and I just want to show you where you can change that. If you go up to your options and you scroll down to edit window scrolling, you can turn that off. And what I like to do is while the music is playing, maybe I'm still editing this part and I don't want to scroll, you know, because maybe I'm doing something over here. So I scroll manually, but that's how you turn that on and off. And there's different settings. I recommend page if you're going to use it. Continuous is just kind of weird because it's just got this playhead that sits in the center. And it's hard to edit, and it's hard to do anything. I don't like that one. So that's auto scrolling. And so I'm going to set mine to page. After playback means that it'll, once you go past the screen and you hit stop, after you've played it back, then it will scroll. And that one's really confusing too. So either page or none is my suggestion. And one other thing about the transport that can be really useful is if you look up here, insertion follows playback. So this makes your machine behave differently. So if it's basically auto rewind to 0 or auto rewind to where you started playing. So if I have that off and I hit play and I stop and I hit play again, it's going to always start from the same spot. Right? If you turn that on, it behaves more like a tape machine would, where it just stops and rests. Most of the time, I don't have this on. But that's a really important and can be confusing because sometimes it rewinds and sometimes it doesn't. And the shortcut key is just pressing the letter N as a single stroke key, you know, with this little gold thing on here. If you hit the letter N, then it will toggle this thing on. And sometimes I brush against the N when I'm hitting the space bar, and all of a sudden it's not rewinding back to where I started, you know. So that's how you fix that if that happens to you. Because it's definitely better. I like it off because you're going to be always starting at the same place. And if you're punching in and out, you don't have to bring it back to your starting point again. That's the letter N. So what I want to talk about, I'm just going to mute this instrument track here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about recording drum tracks and some different techniques that you can use to make it easier. So if I put my drum track in record, right? I got my drums, and we talked about how they're set up on Expand. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to address drum tracks, right? You can play in your tracks. I'm just going to put 1 bar count off for right now so we don't have to wait. So you can play in your tracks one at a time. I mean, some guys can play them in, you know. Right? That's one technique. That's not easy to do. And you can't get very detailed when you're playing everything at one time. So one option is to record your tracks separately. Speed it up some. Right. So I'm going to duplicate this kick drum track, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to duplicate. And when I duplicate, it brings up this dialog box. And this dialog box, first of all, how many tracks do you want to duplicate? I'm going to make 2. But besides that, there's these other options here. So you can tell it what you want to duplicate. If you leave these first 2 selected, it's going to not only duplicate the track, which is what I want. I just want the plugin, and I just want, I just want to record something else using that same plugin. So if you leave these 2 selected and you hit OK, well, look, it duplicates the kick drum too, and I don't want that. Right? So alternatively, let me scroll back out so I can see. I'll just delete these. They're selected, so I'm going to hit delete. If you duplicate the tracks and turn those off, I'm going to go down, right-clicking, duplicate, and I'm going to just turn these things off. Now you have blank tracks, but you have the same plugin, and you're ready to record more of the same without having that MIDI data there. So that's what that little part of the duplicate window means. So now I'm going to record my snare drum, and always before you record, name your tracks. I'll duplicate again. We'll call this hat. When you duplicate, sometimes it'll leave both tracks and record, so just be aware of that and turn one off. Now I have this kick drum track up here, and it's named drums, and that's not what I want, right? So we have our command to fix that, and that's called consolidate clip. So when you hit consolidate clip, whatever you have selected, it's going to make your region that long. So I'm just going to select my whole region and consolidate clip, which is Option Shift 3. And then that'll rename my track, whatever it is here. So I'm going to name this kick instead. And I'm going to hit my Option Shift 3. And that'll rename my region or my clip. Oh, you right click on it. Sorry, right click. And then you can go down and rename. But I'm going to use my command. Option Shift 3. Okay, so now we're going to record a snare drum track. Okay, so we got a snare drum track, and let's record a little hi-hat track. Okay. So we're going to pretend like I didn't make all those little flubs there. What we can do now is we can merge all these tracks into one, so you're not taking up so many resources, right? Because now I have 3 plugins open for one drum set, and that's not necessary. So what I can do is I can select my hi-hat track. I can copy it. And then I can select my kick drum track. I can either just click on it because it's starting right at the beginning, and I'm in grid mode, so I don't have to worry about it moving. Or I can, select my hi-hat track. I can hit copy, and I can use my key commands, the P and the colon, to move up and down my selection. And remember we talked about merge paste, right? So I can, hit my command and rename the track. Well, it also merges the data. So Option M is the command. So if I select my hi-hat and I hit copy and I move up to my kick drum track and I hit that command, Option M, merge paste, it's going to add my hi-hat track to it. And then I can do the same thing with my snare drum track. I'm going to copy. I'm going to move my selection up to the kick drum track. I'm going to hit merge paste. And now I can just delete these tracks because I have everything on one track. And I can quantize it because I didn't play it in very well. Maybe I'll set my strength to 90. And you don't need note off for drums because they have their own amount of duration. And then I could just duplicate it and make a drum track out of it. Okay, so that's one way to work with drum tracks. Everybody clear on that? Okay, the second way, I'm going to just delete this data. The second way to do it is use something called MIDI merge. And if you look up here in our MIDI section, you'll see that there's a button here that we haven't used yet, and it looks like an arrow. It's like a merge sign on the street, right? Like a merge sign. And if you click on this, then you're actually, every time you record, if you have this off and you play a kick drum track, and then next you want to play a snare drum track and you hit record again, right? It's erasing my kick drum track as I record. With MIDI merge, right? When I play my snare drum track now, it's just going to add it to my kick drum track. So I'll hit record again. Right? So it's cumulative. It's adding tracks. And now if I want to record a hi-hat, I'm just on the same track. Right? So that's how you can work on just one track with your drums and merge them as you go.
Professor.
Yeah.
For some reason, my merge button is grayed out. It's not something I can click on.
Merge button is grayed out. Boy, you've got some good ones. I've never seen that before. Merge button is grayed out. And you have a MIDI track, and you've got a MIDI track and record.
Yeah, I'm using the drum track that you had on the project.
But you're able to record MIDI right now, right?
Yeah. I have my MIDI keyboard, MIDI controller plugged in.
Uh-huh.
And I'm able to play it and add stuff, play stuff in.
Oops, I just saw it there. Oh, you have on loop record maybe. So you have to have loop record off. So does your record button look like this or does it look like that?
I can't see my record button.
Okay,
So,
open up your
hold on.
transport.
It looks like the loop.
Okay, so that's what it is. You've got loop record on. So just right click on that and put, your record
Okay.
button to normal.
Okay, now I can turn it. Got it.
By the way, Google is so much our friend. Any Pro
Yeah.
Tools error that you get, you can type it in and usually find the problem. Any kind of
Yep.
questions you have, just Google it and it comes right up. Because you're not the only one that's had that problem, right?
Thank you.
Okay, so that's kind of MIDI merge. And obviously, I'm sure you guys are probably aware that if you're working with a smaller keyboard, sometimes, some of these school keyboards are only a couple of octaves. And if you're working with a small keyboard, the drums might be out of range of your instrument. And you have on your keyboard, I think about any keyboard would have a button. Mine, it's got an octave up and down button, even though it's an 88 keyboard. I don't know why they put octave up and down on an 88 keyboard, but I do have that. Somewhere on your controller is a way to shift octaves and get to those other drum sounds if you're drum programming. So talking about drum programming, I just want to play you a couple of little things here because there's this drummer that I really, really like, and his name is Jeff Porcaro, and he was a founding member of Toto. But I don't like him because of Toto. That's not the reason, because I work for the band, right? I like him because he played on hundreds and hundreds of hits in the 80s and 90s. And unfortunately, he died very early. He died when he was 38. But he had a groove and a way of playing that I haven't heard from many drummers. And I've worked with great drummers. I've worked with Steve Gadd, and I've worked with Vinnie Colaiuta, and I've worked all these great drummers. But there was something about the groove of this drummer. And we're drum programming. So we're trying to emulate a real drummer. And that's the whole goal, right? So I've got this little video that I wanted to show you. And it's just him talking about how he uses accents to make his drum parts groove and to create a lope and a feel. And he was really a genius with this. And one of his drum lines for the song Rosanna is a drum shuffle that he plays. It's been, it's been used as an example of the perfect groove, if you will. It's really about as beautiful as you can play a groove. And so he's talking about what goes on in his head. And I'm just going to play a few minutes and then I'll jump around on this video because it's a long video. If you want to look it up online sometime, it's really interesting. But he's a drummer, so he goes into some technical stuff that I'm going to kind of skip over, like his grip and that kind of thing. But I want you to just hear about how he accents his notes. And the link is Jeff Porcaro instructional video, and it's on YouTube. So if you want to look it up sometime. So let's just take a listen here. So he's going to talk about some technical stuff. But the point was that as he's playing these different hi-hat patterns, if he's accenting on the downbeats, right, it gives it a drive, right? And if he's accenting on the half notes, it's a more open feel, right? And it gives more space. And so he's playing the same thing. He's playing eighth notes, right? But by the way he's accenting, it totally changes the groove. And he was really the master of this. I'll skip ahead and play a little bit more on another section of groove here. But I highly recommend you check out this video. So listen to how solid his bass drum and his backbeats are. They're at exactly the same time every time. And he's able to float over the top with all these different accents, or whether he goes to toms or whatever pattern he's playing. He has this very solid feel. And he's able to use his accents to bring out different elements and different rhythms. So that's enough of that. But I just wanted to share that with you because this guy, he played on everything. He played on Michael Jackson's records, Boss Skaggs, Ricky Lee Jones, Joe Cocker, Eric Clapton, Christopher Cross, Miles Davis, Donald Fagen. Just about anybody you can name, he was playing on their projects during that time, And he played with Bruce Springsteen even, you know. So great, great drummer, and really worth watching this video if you want to learn some drum programming techniques. Alrighty, so I got one more. Let's see here. Let me take a look at my list. I've got one more thing that I want to go over. So we're going to close our tempo demo. I'm not going to save. And we're going to open up our notation practice. And Pro Tools has some basic notation. It's not very good. So don't expect much and you won't be disappointed. But it's good for down and dirty type of charts. And so what I have here is I have a little 4-piece thing here. Right? So we'll just take a look at the violin for right now. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to open my MIDI editor. And when we take a look, I'm going to click on this little note icon like we did in the past, right? And that's going to open up my note editor. So if you look at this and you listen to it, this looks like total garbage. I mean, this is eighth notes we have in the chart, and the musicians are supposed to read something like this, right? It's not useful at all. But there's a very quick and easy way to correct all this, and that's by using quantizing. So the first thing you have to do before you do anything, save as a new version, because we already have our performance the way we want it. So we want to make a new version of this that's just for editing, for notation. Okay, so we're going to save as, and we're going to save it as notation. Okay, so that's a notation version. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is I'm on our melody track here. A lot of times you'll probably want to select a little bit at a time and quantize it and then take a look and quantize it again and take a look. I already know that this track works. So I'm going to save a little bit of time here because we're running out of time. And I'm just going to select all. And I'm going to hit option 0. And I'm going to quantize. Now I know that my grid is eighth notes. So I'll set my grid there. And I'm going to quantize note on and note off. And I'm going to turn off strength because I want this to be 100% as accurate as we can make it so the notation will look nice. So I'm going to hit apply. All right, so that's the first step. So let's take a look and see how we're doing. Okay, we're getting better. All right, it's starting to look better. Now you see that some of these things have rests, right, that maybe we don't want in the music. So the way you can fix that is to go in this same window, go to change duration. And then we can, if we look down our menus, right, we can see there's a legato setting. So we're going to turn on legato, and we're going to set our gap to 0. All right, and now when we hit apply with all these notes selected, you'll see that now it starts to look very easy to read. Does everybody get that? So the first thing we did was quantize to put our notes in the right place, and then we selected the quantize of the the lowest resolution. So we have eighth notes, and we quantized. And then we set our durations to be legato, so every note is connected. And if you look at it in this window, you can see, I'll undo the legato, and you'll see that it just changed and extended those notes so we don't have any rests. Right, so now our chart looks pretty good. So next, let's go to the harp part. Okay, and I'm just getting to the harp by double clicking on the clips up here, but you can also do it over here. So on the harp, we're going to do the same type of thing. This one you would definitely want to do a little bit at a time, but I've already done this and I'm trying to save some time for us. So I'm going to go to my option 0. I'm going to open up my quantize and I'm going to do the same thing. Set it to eighth notes, note on and note off, no strength, and hit apply. If I had 16th notes in here, I'd have to use 16th as my resolution. So we're starting to look a little bit better here. So I'm going to do the same thing now, and I'm going to go to change duration. I'm going to set my legato gap to 0, and I'm going to hit apply. All right, now we're starting to look like something. You could actually read this. Okay. So let's move on, and we'll do it to the piano track next. Now the piano looks like it used sustain pedal. So these all look like they're just eighth notes. So first we're going to quantize again. And then we're going to go to change duration and do that same legato gap of 0. And now we get this. And that's much more legible. If you look at the end here, there's a little problem. This doesn't last a whole note. It cuts off there. So what I can do is I can go back to my, piano scroll editor because it's easier to grab notes with. I'm just going to grab this last chord. And then instead on my duration, I'm going to set this last chord to set all. And I'm going to make it 4 beats long. And I'm going to hit apply. And now, if we look at our notation, it's all cleaned up. All right, one more track. So we have our bass track. It's all over the map too. Same technique, exactly. Quantize, apply, duration, legato, set gap to 0, apply. And now we have a bass part. This last chord doesn't last long enough. So you can even select the note here. I just draw a box around it. And then you can set to 4 beats. And then you have a whole note at the end. So if I select all these tracks, I can look at all my score so far and see how things are looking. And that's legible. You know, you can read it. It's no problem. So now if I wanted to print this, I'm going to close this window out. And if I wanted to print this, I could go to my score editor. And that's under the window menu and score editor. And it brings up this, which is pretty ugly. But it's somewhat tweakable. Right? It's very basic functions. First thing we want to do is name it. And I did that, I'm sorry, by just double clicking on the title. And that brings up this score editor. Okay, so we'll just close this out for right now. We're just going to name it for right now. So now we want to make sure that all of our music is in the right clef. And you can right-click on the name of one of these tracks, and it brings up a little dialog. And you can go down to Notation Display Track Settings. So now up here we can see we can scroll between all of our different tracks. And what I'm just doing right now is setting up the staffs. So piano is grand staffed, right? Harp is grand staff. And I'm just scrolling down to each one. Bass, we'll put in bass clef. And then violin we'll put in treble clef. So now all of our staves are correct. All of our clef signs. Okay, so that's I'm just showing you some down and dirty stuff here. Besides that, now we have our score at least in the right clef, so we can double click back on this title bar, and you can go and you can just drag these settings around to change the way the score looks. So I can make the staff size bigger or smaller. Right? I can make more space in between the stabs if I want, just by clicking on the number and dragging, or I can type it in however I want. And now we're starting to look a little more like a score. This is legible. You could read this and you could follow along. And if you wanted to make a real score out of it, you would import it into a notation program. And Pro Tools actually has a way to import directly into Sibelius, and you can import it. Export it directly into Sibelius. Right.
Now, is there a way to do that in the opposite direction? Go from Sibelius to Pro Tools?
You would save a MIDI file, but what happens when you do that? If you could save a Sibelius MIDI file and import it into Pro Tools, there's a under the import section of the file menu, you can import a MIDI session, a standard MIDI file.
Yeah, got it.
Right. But the problem with going in that direction is Sibelius is going to be completely quantized, most likely. So it's not going to sound musical. So that's the reason I saved a different version for this. A couple of other little things to show you about this. You can just drag these things and play around and figure out what looks good for you. There is a little thing up here that is a double bar line. And so you can click on that, and that'll cut out a lot of those extra bars. It won't cut out all of them, but it'll cut out a lot of them. And then you can even go, and it looks like this track is holding over too long. Maybe if I delete that, maybe I can get rid of one more of those bars in the score editor. So again, this is just down and dirty. They don't even want you to use this. They want you to buy Sibelius. So that's the way it, And so let's get back to our score. So if you wanted to print out parts now, right, you can just turn off these things and print them out. Right, so there's my song 1 piano part. There's my harp part. And then you can resize these however you like to make them look nice for the musicians. Okay. So I'm going to show you one more little thing, and then we'll be done. In the ruler bar, if we go over here and we select chords, right? So this is how we turn things on and off with the ruler bar, and we're going to turn on chords now. You can actually go through your chart, and you can do it down here also. It's actually probably easier to do it here. I'm going to go to the piano track, and I'm going to go here. You can also change your ruler bars in the MIDI editor, right? So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to turn on chords. Right? And now if I look at my notes editor here, I can see what my chords are, right? So let's just go through, and we can insert chords in the same way that we have on all the other stuff by hitting the little plus. That'll bring up a dialog box. And you can, name your chords. Like the first chord is a C. And then I'm going to set my resolution to half notes so I can click on the right thing easily. My next one is a C with a third in the bass. So I'll insert another chord here. And we put the bass with an E. Right. Next chord is an F, plus, change to F major, boom. And then now if we have the same chords here, right, for these first two, so we can actually just grab these. We can copy those first two measures, copy, Command C, we can paste here. Right? And then we have A minor. Excuse me. Okay. And then we have a G. And then we have our two little C chords again. So I've still got them saved in my paste. So I'll paste again, and etc. And, just go ahead and finish out your chord symbols. Right? So now once you've done these, if we go to our score editor, you can also see the chord symbols in the music. So you can make a lead sheet with chords in it. And you can adjust where those chords sit in your little window here. You can move them up a little bit if they're in the way of your notes, And you can make something that's useful, for a down and dirty way to give musicians a chart from your sequencing. Everybody get that? Any questions on any of this stuff? I've gone through so much material today. Everybody feeling confident? Or at least confident enough to discover it on your own? Right? All right, so we have 2 weeks before our next class, right? So I gave you guys an assignment, and some people are still struggling a little bit with the MIDI thing. Some of you guys are doing amazing and great. I mean, really, really good. But I wanted to do one more assignment with MIDI before we move on to audio. And so for next week, we're going to for 2 weeks from now, we're just going to do another song, and we're going to have graduates do 10 tracks, undergrads do 6. And I put the assignment in your class folder there. Right? But I want you to use some of these things we talked about today. Right? So I want you to try to use the editing techniques we talked about, when we were making our arrangements and how we made the sampled instruments sound better. I want you to use include drum tracks on this one. Make sure you've got some drum tracks, and use MIDI merge if possible. Make some markers, do at least one tempo change, and make a 2-bar leader at the song start. And if you want to make a chart, it's bonus, and have fun with it. And I just want you to really get these tools under your belt. Okay? So that's for 2 weeks, and then we're kind of out of MIDI. We're into audio land.
Are we submitting drafts next week?
Nope, you don't have to. If you want to, I'll be available. So anybody that has any questions or needs anything, I try to be pretty available for you guys. So if you have any questions, email me. I don't mind jumping on Zoom with you guys and helping you out, but I want this stuff to become second nature, so you remember it. Because if you just do one song and then 6 months later you come back to Pro Tools, you're not going to remember how to do all this stuff. But the more you do it, the better and the faster you get. All righty? Okay, guys. You look beat up. I'm sorry, man.
It's late over here. On the East
Yeah,
Coast.
I know. Okay, I'll try not to keep you guys so late next time. I'm supposed to. It's supposed to be a 3-hour class, but there's supposed to be a break in it, and it just doesn't feel right to take a break with an online class. So I went a little bit over, but I had a lot of data to go through. So anybody, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question that doesn't really necessarily apply to everybody, so that's why I just waited to the end. But so on Logic and on like GarageBand and whatever, there's like some pre-built like sequencer drums, and it's like the whole grid of boxes, and you select like beat 1, the 16th notes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
And it's got like a line for like each kick drum, hi-hat, tom.
Right. The drum. You're talking about the drum editor.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there any equivalent to that in Pro Tools?
there. Let me research that. I don't use that. I'm getting it confused with Logic now as I think back, because Logic has that whole drum editor section.
Right. It just makes it so much more convenient to make drum tracks.
Yeah,
But there's less like nitty gritty stuff that you can do sometimes, like probably like you can't necessarily. Although I've actually started playing with, so as a teacher, I'm going to be starting to use BandLab, which is a free online DAW that schools often use to do stuff like this. And they have a pretty cool sequencer where you can actually adjust the velocity of each little thing.
Right. Well, there is
cool.
this. There is a cool plugin that you guys have for free, and it's called Boom, and it works similarly to that. It's an old school sequencer. It's modeled after the old 808s and 909s, and so if you open up a Boom plugin under Instrument, Boom. Okay, so this is an old school sequencer. And this type of grid is what you're kind of describing, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you hit play on this, you can see the kick drum at the top.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see the snare, and you can change these things. And by clicking on them, you can change the velocity. So that's a softer one, and even a softer one, and that's off. So you can just draw in whatever you like on Boom and work in that type of mode. I mean, this is kind of a whole different lesson if you want to get into this. This is, you can change every sound. You can go here and you can change the kick drum sound to a different kick or a different snare.
Right.
You can change the tuning and level and pan of each one, but it works in that old school kind of way. And then you would save a pattern. You would have an A pattern and you would have a B pattern and that kind of thing. And you would chain patterns together. So it's not exactly like the drum editor, but it's a similar type of approach.
So and then you save those like presets at just the same way we did with the click track then, I guess, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, like you were saying in the beginning, you said that Pro Tools is more like an IBM. Logic is here. You want to make a drum track? Here, use this. This is probably what you want, so here, take this. Pro Tools is, you know what you want. Here's the tools, go and do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that your analogy works very well. And I'm going to be working, I'm doing a gig the next couple of weeks. I'm doing a live concert. So what I thought I might do for you guys is film everything, like film our rehearsal and our setup. I may not play the music back for you, but I want to show you technically what's going on. I'll have to get permission from the band if I want to play any music. But I can show you how a concert is put together. And we start out in a rehearsal space, and we set up all the equipment, and we measure everything, and we set up all the snakes and cables, and we build a stage. And then we deassemble the whole thing and take it to another location. So it's pretty interesting, and you can see how all the different systems, the audio systems, work. Okay? So hopefully I'll be able to turn you on to some of that stuff. It's a lot of fun. Okay? Have a good night, guys.